Thank you so much, Kristen, and hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be joining you today from Hong Kong. The weather is finally cooled down here, and so we don't have the humidity, which is really nice. As Kristen said, I've been working for EPFL's International Affairs office now for about 4 years. And you heard from Olivier earlier today about some of the strategic roles that his office plays in international collaborations. And as you see on the program, the title of this session is How to Navigate the Asian Collaboration Network. So as many of us have recognized, the last couple of decades have witnessed Asia's rise. And the technological ecosystem here is maturing, and scientists from all over the world are being drawn to Asia. You probably also know that there exist a variety of socio-political and economic systems here in which the advance of science occurs. And this affects the way science is funded, often with much closer collaboration between government, academia, and industry in places such as China. But if we want to continue to solve global challenges, it is important to ensure that Asia is at the research table. So one of the things the International Affairs Office did during the 2020-2021 academic year, when COVID grounded most of us, was to do a study on the current connections between EPFL faculty and Asian collaborators. And I would like to share with you some of the high-level findings. So to set the stage, let me share with you the objectives of the study, the methodology, the study's focus areas. So if you give me just a second here, I will share my screen. Okay, just get it full screen here so you can. All right. Do you all see it full screen? Here, let me just, okay, we'll go with that. So what we did is we first set out to map the connections between EPFL researchers to Asia through co-publications, research projects, student exchange, and shared editorial boards. And then we went about to analyze the connections both at the institutional level as well as at the individual level. And lastly, our aim was to find some ways to raise EPFL's visibility in Asia and attract top talent to EPFL. So we conducted 94 one-on-one Zoom interviews and focused on connections with the 8 Asian countries that are listed on the slide. So interestingly, what we discovered, I'm not able to move my slides here for some reason. Just see. Sorry about this. Yeah, I'm not able to move my slides. So in any event, I think I will stop sharing actually and just go through this verbally real quickly because we're running a little bit behind anyway. One of the things we discovered is that 93% of the EPFL researchers we interviewed who had Asian connections were from 4 of the EPFL schools. So the School of Engineering, the School of Basic Sciences, ENOC, and the School of Life Sciences. And I'm sure some of you in the room are from one of these schools. So I think it's really good for you to know that you have colleagues that have experience in Asia. We also discovered that 93% of the researchers we interviewed with Asian connections were affiliated with 4 of the 6 EPFL center categories as well. So organizations or centers such as the NCCR Robotics, the Center for Digital Humanities, EPFL's Hub for Optimization, as well as the Brain Mind Institute, Center for Neuroprosthetics, and the EPFL Center for Imaging. Again, around a third of the researchers we interviewed sit on editorial boards with Asian colleagues, and that provides a very, very good way for them to also further their Asian collaborations and develop the network. And well over half of the researchers we interviewed have co-authored a publication with an Asian author. And many of these researchers met each other at academic conferences, another great way to start networks. Around a quarter of the researchers had a project funded with an Asian partner, and often the funding came from bilateral funding programs between Switzerland and Asian partners. And you heard about that this morning from SNSF and from CIRI, and also the support that Swissnex provides as well. So I'd like to talk just a few minutes about some of the Asian countries where EPFL researchers have had experience. And as Kristen said, we're going to share with you a few testimonials of how some EPFL professors have navigated their Asian collaboration network. So let's just go through this real quickly, because I know I also stand between you and lunch. So I don't want to take too much time, and the testimonials are really where the real rich content is. So let's start with China. Half of EPFL's researchers that we interviewed had strong connections to China, and many of them had connections with universities based in Beijing. So Beihang, Chinese Academy of Sciences, also known as CAS, Peking University in Tsinghua, and others are Fudan and Shanghai Jiaotong in Shanghai, Sustec in Shenzhen, and Zhejiang in Hangzhou, which is the home of Alibaba. Some of you have probably been there. So I'd like you to listen in on an interview that I did with Professor Jean-Philippe Ansermet on how he developed his Chinese network. So Professor Ansermet just retired this past summer after 30 years with EPFL. He's a Swiss physicist and engineer, and his research focuses on the fabrication and properties of nanostructure materials, as well as spintronics. So if we could just listen now to the interview with Professor Ansermet, please. So Jean-Philippe, I understand that earlier this month, you won the 2022 Credit Suisse Award for Best Teaching. Congratulations, it's amazing.
That's right, and it is amazing. I'm delighted. It's a wonderful way to end 30 years of teaching, teaching in many ways, but especially first-year physics. For every year since I started, I've been teaching first-year physics.
Amazing, that's wonderful. All right, let's dip in a little bit to your experience in Asia, and I'll ask you a few questions, and we'll gain some interesting insights from your experience. So maybe you can tell us just a bit about when and how you first started collaborating with researchers in Asia. How did that start?
It started with a call by the well, let's call it the Sino-Swiss Science and Technology Cooperation, SSSTC, which was headed by ETH Zurich, I believe, and I got a grant. We planned with a colleague, Daping Yu, who was at the time at Peking University. We planned for our students to get started on a project. Then in the year 2, one semester, the students would go to one place, and then the other student would go to the other student's place.
Wow.
And then the third year we would finish. And the project was accepted, and the student came. His name is Haiming Yu, and he became, well, he ended up doing his PhD officially in Lausanne,
awesome.
with times at Peking University. And then he did a postdoc in Munich, and then he became professor at Beihang University. And we've been collaborating since then. So it's a very fruitful collaboration.
Wow. And amazing. And obviously some support from within Switzerland for kind of getting that started, and an initiative that kind of got you guys, pulled you together. Now, had you known Daping Yu before?
No.
Okay.
He did his PhD in Paris.
Okay.
I found out, but I just there was this call, and I looked at Peking University, And Daping had been making semiconducting nanowires, and I was making magnetic nanowires. So we got together.
Awesome.
It was an obvious match. Yeah.
That's amazing. So given the travel distance between Switzerland and Asia, how have you managed to keep your Asian network active?
That was not a problem. I'm used to traveling to the US. It takes me, the flight is, between 10 and 12 hours. That's if you go to California. I must say, this is purely psychological. I had the impression that China was very, very far away. But it's the same flight time to go to China as to go to some places in the US. So in terms of flight time, there's no difference.
So did you find yourself going quite often?
I think I went at least once a year, and possibly once a year to visit the lab with which I was collaborating. And then if there's a conference, then it's a second visit. I think, which I would combine, of course, with a visit to the lab.
Absolutely. And would you say during the collaborations that you've had in Asia, were there any particular challenges that you think were unique to this part of the world, or things that you found different from, for example, collaborating with your collaborators in the US?
No, I don't see any specific difficulty. I work in China with people who have been doing science in Europe or the US, more likely so in the US. Their sense of hospitality is outstanding. You just have to begin to interact with people in China to discover what I'm saying is absolutely true. And I have to say, they are pragmatic. They mean business. If they say we're all going to collaborate, they collaborate. I often explain to people, it's like working with people in Germany. If a German colleague says, I want to do this with you, the moment he says that, he already knows how he's going to fund the necessary travel expenses and things like this, and he's ready to go. And in China, it was always very clear and very straightforward, very well organized.
That's awesome. So, I want to swing back to, you were describing earlier this relationship with Daping You and Haiming You and this collaboration that you've had over a number of years. Can you tell us just a little bit more about how that developed, and, did it result in publications? Did you, what was the impact that collaboration had for you in your research?
Enormous and very positive. I don't know where to start. First of all, we had this initial collaboration, and that ended up with a PhD. That PhD candidate became professor, and that professor sent me his students or for an internship or things like this. We got more funding through the same channel, SSTC, for these internships. Two of them were 6 months, one was a year, and one was 2 years. So, and out of these came out a lot of publications.
Excellent.
Recently, it's been impossible to go to China, but I maintain my collaboration. We meet on Zoom. We used to meet once a week, and we decided to do it every other week. And that's an extensive meeting. It's like 3 hours. The students present what they're doing. We discuss the experiments. We discuss interpretation, and then we write papers. And before this interview, I had a quick look. We published already 3 papers this year, and 2 in 2021, 4 in 2020, and 3 in 2019. So evidently,
COVID didn't stop you.
Of CRISPR did not affect our productivity.
Yeah. No, and that's awesome. I'm just curious, do you feel that that's because the trust had already been developed beforehand, and then you were able to carry on, or do you think one potentially could develop that just over Zoom?
Yeah, that's part of it is a Zoom question.
Yeah.
Part of it is I I'm not sure I can make a general statement, but my PhD student, Haiming Yu, is a very open person, charming person, very easy to get along with, very constructive, very positive. So it's been a pleasure to collaborate with him.
Yeah.
I might not be characterizing the whole idea of collaborating with people in China. China is a very large country. Maybe it's a characteristic of mine that I want to deepen the connection rather than to be a busy bee going to several fancy campuses that are known to be very fancy.
Right.
Now, I must say, my collaboration was on spintronics. I have an interest in something very special, terahertz generators called gyrotrons. Through my contact, I said, look, Haiming, you know, my former student, I'd really like to go to Shenzhen and, to Chengdu, where there's a national center of research on these devices.
Right.
He said, oh, there's no problem. We can go visit so-and-so, and then you can swing by and have a look at the center. So I radiated from this core collaboration, if you want.
Absolutely. And that's exciting. I mean, I think you can see how that relationship has multiplied, which is wonderful. So I have one final question for you before we close down for today. What advice would you give to your younger self about building an Asian collaboration network?
I think what I did worked well. To develop trust with one small group of people, right? I mean, I'm talking about two people. One was a student of the other. The student became professor, but I stayed connected with these people and their closest friends and collaborators. I'm not saying don't do something else, but if you do this, you're going to be happy and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So Jean-Philippe, thank you very much. This has been so insightful, and I know for our audience today, very helpful as well. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So now continuing on in China, EPFL also has a lot of connections to Hong Kong, where I am at the moment. And one thing people may not realize is that Hong Kong has 5 universities in the top 100 global QS rankings, the most of any city in the world. So it's not surprising that EPFL researchers have a lot of connections to Hong Kong. And one of the things that's interesting about Hong Kong is the applied research funding here is unique in that up to 50% of the funding can be used outside of Hong Kong, which allows many researchers to strengthen their international collaboration networks. We'll hear a little bit later from EPFL's Professor Sarah Kenderdine and how she just very recently successfully accessed this funding. Now, moving on to India, we have less research connections in India, but those connections are growing, as you heard also from Jonas at SwissNext as well. And then in Japan, Japan has been a long time research collaborator for EPFL. And our collaborations are primarily spread across 8 Japanese institutions with very strong connections with the University of Tokyo, Tokyo Tech, and Kyoto University. Professor Auke Ijspeert has had research collaborations with Japan for a very long time. And I did also an interview with him in which he shared how those collaborations came about and which funding sources he used to support the research. Some of you may know Professor Ijspeert is a Swiss-Dutch roboticist and neuroscientist, He's a professor of biorobotics in the Institute of Bioengineering and the head of the Biorobotics Laboratory in the School of Engineering. So let's listen in on the interview with Professor Auke Ijspeert. So Auke, I really appreciate you joining me today. And I wonder if you would tell us a bit about your collaborations in Asia over the years.
Yeah, so I work in robotics, and clearly Asia, and especially Japan, is a great place to work and collaborate with for robotics. So my first link to Japan was, in fact, when I was assistant professor at USC in Los Angeles. And there I had a chance to originally my postdoc supervisor, and who then became my collaborator, Stefan Shah, to get access to a very nice humanoid robot at ATR, a very nice research institute in Japan, close to Kyoto. And for me, that was a wonderful introduction to Japan. Every summer, I was spending there 1 month, and I did it four times. And it was each time a great experience because, first of all, the institute is amazing. They had very nice robotic infrastructure, a beautiful humanoid robot. And Professor Kawato, he is very much a visionary of how to use robots to do neuroscience. So I really much like that, collaborating with him. And I have to say, each time I was going from LA to Japan, I loved it because I felt coming back a bit to Switzerland, where I was born. So the fact that the trains are on time, that people are polite and shy and nice, many things remind me of Switzerland. So I had really lots of pleasure to go to Japan each time.
That's absolutely wonderful. And what do you think has been the key to developing a successful collaborative network for you in Asia?
So I think the key is to discuss with people. For me, each time it has gone through conferences. So having a good time with colleagues at conferences, approaching people after the talk, interestingly having beer with the right people, like the social events was important. So some of my best collaboration, especially with Japanese professors, were discussing science after a conference, and then discussing, it would be nice to collaborate, exchange people, and also write grants together. So that's how I got several collaborations started.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's important for us to remember. Those conferences can be very, very fruitful in terms of establishing relationships. I wonder if you could tell us the story maybe of one of your Asian collaborations in a little more detail in terms of how it started, how it's developed, how it stands today, just so we can have a little bit more flavor.
Yeah. So I think one of my most active and long-term collaborations is with Professor Akio Ishiguro, who is a professor at Tohoku University. And we met 22 years ago at a conference. So we had good discussions then, and we always kept contact. And then at some point, we discovered this wonderful funding scheme called the Human Frontier Science Project, which is a very nice program to get funding, which is across continents. It's one of the few ways where you should be multiple continents. It's meant to fund research in life sciences, but with an engineering perspective.
I see.
So I was at that time doing computational neuroscience modeling. He was doing robotics, and together with Emily Standen, who is a professor in Canada, we wrote a grant together for HFSP that we were lucky to get. And that was, for me, a wonderful collaboration. Like Emily is a biologist, he studies fish. Akio is more a roboticist and a modeler, and he was studying the centipede. And I'm a computational science roboticist studying the salamander. And we discovered our three animals have very similar ways of doing amphibious locomotion, switching between ground and water locomotion. And so at another conference, we met Emily, and then we decided, let's write a grant together. And this is a unique chance to get really funding, very nice funding across continents. And it has just finished the project, and it was a very big success. So we were meeting every year, and we really had a very nice collaboration, bringing our different expertise together.
That's excellent. And does that still continue today?
So we have to write the final report for the end of the month. So I'm busy with that, but we keep writing papers together. So that without funding, with our own funding, In fact, interestingly, the ideas I got in that project were useful to get another big funding, an ERC Synergy grant, a European grant, that has now been a follow-up with other partners, but that has been very instrumental. Though I think the ideas are so great that we still have work to do and write paper together on this topic of using robots as a scientific tool to understand animal locomotion.
Absolutely. So what advice would you have for an EPFL researcher about the importance of building an Asian network in your particular field? And, you know, how you alluded to getting it started through conferences, but how do you keep it alive and active?
Yeah, I would say so. First of all, it's really nice to collaborate with people in an international level, and for me, Japan has always been a very important country in terms of robotics research. They always were in advance of many others. Interestingly, they are a bit less good at marketing than other countries, so that's a bit sad for them because they do really state-of-the-art things, but they just don't sell it as well as possibly colleagues in the US. So still their expertise and their imagination, creativity, and skills are really top. So it's really worth collaborating with Japanese colleagues. And I would say good ways of collaborating is through exchange of people. Many students from Japan want to spend a month or 6 months doing a project with us. So that's a very good way of collaborating, co-supervising master or even PhD students. And vice versa, in the other direction, Japan being a very nice culture, also quite a few of our master students want to go there and do a project there. So I would say that's a good way also of starting a collaboration. It's co-supervising a master student. It doesn't involve much funds, and it's a great way of starting a research topic together. And then, funding is another issue, finding funding, co-funding, but there start to be issues like options between the Swiss NSF and the Japanese research initiatives. So they are interesting initiatives. And otherwise, if you're in biology and in engineering, this HFSP project is really a nice source of funding.
So I have one last question for you. I remember in one of our previous conversations, we talked about this idea of friendship in science. Tell me just a little bit as we conclude here, what that means to you.
Yeah, that really means a lot for me. The best projects always I've had are friendship-driven, friendship-driven science is really a key thing to do. Because once you're friends, everything gets easier. You collaborate, you answer fast to emails, you trust each other more, you really care more about the others. And little by little in a network of people, I know many people, but those I really want to work with are friends, good friends. That know about my family, I know about theirs and everything. And this notion of friendship-driven science is super important. And also what we always do, like we did it a lot in this HFSP collaboration we had, is have on-site meeting, take time to do team building among the team. So the friendship is not only among the PI, the professors, but also among the people. And that for me also beautiful when we meet each other, we hug and people know each other, care about each other. So caring, that's super important. So spending time to create friendship is as important as doing good science. I would say even more important. Then the rest follows almost for free.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. I mean, this idea of friendship-driven science is I think just wonderful and something that really many of us can benefit from and learn from and cultivate the way you have. So thank you so much for your time today. And we look forward to hearing much more from you in the coming years. Thank you.
It was a great pleasure. Thanks a lot for taking me. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so we are coming down to the last little bit here. The last 3 countries we looked at were Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. And so similar to Hong Kong, EPFL has many, many connections in Singapore, particularly with NTU and NUS. There's also a 3rd university there called the Southern University of Technology and Design, which is a much newer university. And actually one of our EPFL professors was seconded there in its early days to help with the setup. So another great country for collaboration opportunities. South Korea has been a strong research partner. And many of our researchers have worked with particularly KAIST and Seoul National University. South Korea is currently has a big push in clean energy. So if anybody's interested in that area, South Korea is definitely a place to look at. And then also we have connections in Taiwan. And so what I would like to do here as we get towards the end is Professor Sarah Kenderdine is a New Zealander and a professor of digital museology. She also has a permanent exhibition in Taiwan. She leads EPFL's Laboratory for Experimental Museology, exploring the convergence of aesthetic practice, visual analytics, and cultural data. She has done research in all of the Asian countries that we have looked at and has some excellent insights and recommendations on how to develop and deepen an Asian collaboration network. So let's listen to my recent interview with her. So Sarah, you are one of EPFL's most active Asian collaborators. Could you just tell us a little bit about the Asian countries where you've actually done projects during your career?
Absolutely, Marian. Thank you. I started out as a maritime archaeologist. And so my first real engagement was when I built a large-scale portal website for cultural heritage for all the Southeast Asian nations, 10 Southeast Asian nations of ASEAN. I then went on to build a museum in Karnataka State and have an extensive relationship which is enduring in India through the museum in Karnataka, and then a big exhibition in Mumbai, and then a big work up in Rajasthan, all high-resolution imaging, interactive systems. I established very good research relationships with IIT India, which is their Institute for Technology. And I've just actually been appointed as an adjunct professor there at IIT Jodhpur, which I'm extremely pleased about.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So the relationships have built up over many years in India. I completed a big research project across 7 countries, which was the Atlas of Maritime Buddhism. This has an ongoing component, but was the spread of Buddhism from India through Southeast Asia up into China, down into Korea and Japan. And this was funded originally out of Australia, but became a much larger multi-country initiative, and has resulted in a permanent exhibition in Taiwan and touring exhibitions in Asia. And then in Hong Kong, of course, where I lived, we co-established the Applied Laboratory for Interactive Visualization and Embodiment. This was part of City University, so we had a large lab at the Hong Kong Science Park, which was a wonderful platform. And then went on to do a series of projects which also are ongoing, and these are in China and in Hong Kong. One of these would be the martial arts project, the Living Archive of South Chinese Kung Fu. I currently have PhDs at EPFL working on this archive. It's now in its 12th year. You know, these are big commitments to projects over time. A similar one would be with Tsinghua University in China, the remaking of the Confucian Rites Project, which is a large-scale archaeological, philological, and reconstruction project with multiple outcomes throughout the world. So this touches on some of the projects we've been doing, and there are more to come.
So exciting. I mean, and across so many different Asian countries. So you talked a little bit about starting collaboration in Asia. What would you say were some of the biggest challenges that might be unique to this part of the world as you went, really implemented these projects?
Yes. As a researcher, I think one of the challenges is the local perception of the value of collaboration in Asian countries. Fortunately, as a maritime archaeologist, I was running the Indian Ocean program for excavation. So it had a mandate for Asia, which was quite specific. But within the funding arrangements in Europe for Asian collaborative research, there needs to be a lot of open-mindedness about the value of this. It's a very Eurocentric, Western-centric world that we live in, and yet there are stunning things to be done and brilliant researchers throughout Asia. And I think the disparity in funding towards collaborating in Asia is one of the challenges that is faced and must be overcome, especially in the world that we live in right now, where collaboration, science diplomacy, whatever you like to call it, is really at the kernel of how we need to move forward.
Absolutely. And you've alluded a little bit to the types of support that you've received from different parties. Could you talk a little bit more about, funding sources that you might have gotten within Switzerland, whether they're bilateral programs or within Asia? What are the different avenues where you actually got some of your projects funded?
Absolutely. So I'm pleased to say we're just a recipient of an Indo-Swiss grant, so Switzerland and India.
Wonderful.
Yes, with IIT Jodhpur, and this is related to digital twins, Gupta sculpture, which is at the very high end of Indian Buddhist sculptural period in the 5th century, blockchain, NFTs, that whole network of tools and technologies which need to be developed and are really critical at a time of big repatriation and a big decolonization of collections. So that's one grant. So SNF grant, and with counterpart funding in India.
Okay.
So it was very significant at that level. Then another recent grant is, of course, the ITF grant with Hong Kong, which is an extremely special program. And this was really brokered by EPFL and the International Office and its collaborators in country, which are absolutely vital to turn these projects into reality, because there's a lot of bureaucratic political support to enable these things to happen. And so this is a very significant grant in future cinema systems, which is next generation art technologies. So it's taking the metaverse where it needs to go, and with multi-party collaborations. And in this case, all the funding is coming from Hong Kong, which is also a very unique arrangement where Hong Kong is recognizing Swiss expertise and is prepared to invest at that level for these collaborations. And I think the signals from Asia are equally as important as the signals from Europe.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think this is one of the exciting things to realize, is that there are opportunities here in Asia that maybe some of us aren't even aware of. And I think this is a perfect example.
Yes, it's a perfect example. And the wonderful thing is that we have in our scientific communities, we have conferences that happen all over the world now. And so I'm heavily involved in one community, which is the SIGGRAPH Asia community. Okay. Yes, I could go to the US, but actually because I was often in Asia, I was more focused on the Asian group. This is a network, and in that network are all of the funding opportunities. So for young researchers to engage in conferences that are in Asia is one act to opening up that world. Absolutely.
Well, and I am pleased to say here in Hong Kong, things are starting to open up. So travel will become a little bit easier, which is good. So just, as we're coming sort of to the end, I have a couple more questions for you.
Yes.
You alluded to the fact that you actually lived and worked in Hong Kong for a while, which, as I've told the audience, I'm based in Hong Kong as well. What was that like for you as a researcher?
I think being an expat, and I've been an expat most of my life, it's an extremely privileged position to be in as a guest in someone else's country. I also think that the networks that are in place, things like SwissNext, like the embassy networks, this as well as the scholarly scientific network, these are really, really vital to engage you in community in these particular locations. I mean, Hong Kong is a very dynamic, extremely warm. Hong Kong is a laconic, wonderful, a bit like New York is quite laid back, you know. And of course, Hong Kong has gone through tremendous change in the time since I left, actually, at the beginning of the umbrella revolution. But those relationships that I have had there have endured over time. And I think that's very important. Once they're established, they're ongoing, and we're living in a very global society where everybody is connected to everybody else.
Absolutely.
And that supports the work that we are all trying to do. So I think that goes for any country that one might work in, despite the backdrop, you know, which is COVID, which is politics, which is, you know, the friendships and the ability to do interesting work together, it remains. And people don't change in their desire to do that. Yeah,
absolutely. So maybe just one final question. How would you advise your younger self regarding collaborations in Asia and how to start? Let's assume that you're, you know, a young researcher and you really don't have any connections in Asia. What would you suggest as a good starting point?
I think the academic conference network is probably the access. There are obviously grants for postdocs and PhDs and things that are bilateral in many of these countries. So keeping an eye on that, demanding it also is important, and also taking the risk. Yeah, perceived risk, because it's perceived risk of going to somewhere that you don't know and don't know what the path is. You will find the path, because people are incredibly open and curious in Asia, and very, very warm and welcoming. So I think that, you know, it's not like some places that you rock up, you know, where it's all very well established and you don't really have any access. This is a much more dynamic, fluid kind of context, I think. And that's also in society, you see a lot of fluidity in the way that people have access to people in power, funding, opportunity is quite dynamic.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your time. It's really, I love just seeing your work from afar, and soon we'll see more of it up close here in Hong Kong. So thank you so much for your time. And yeah, look forward to hearing more about the things that are coming out of your lab and out of the amazing work that you do. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Marian.